Hashtag my boss fired me for being late, then begged me when he found out who my father is. The elevator doors slid shut with a metallic whisper that seemed to echo the finality of what had just happened. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel, watching as my face slowly crumpled into disbelief. 20 minutes ago, I had a job. 20 minutes ago, I was just another junior analyst at Morrison Financial Group, struggling to make ends meet in a city that devoured dreams for breakfast. Now I was unemployed, clutching a cardboard box filled with the pathetic remnants of my professional life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been exactly 7 minutes late to the morning meeting, caught in traffic after my ancient Honda finally decided to break down on the highway. 7 minutes. In any reasonable workplace, that would warrant a gentle reminder, maybe a note in my file. But Richard Morrison wasn't reasonable. He was a predator in an expensive suit, and I had given him the excuse he'd been looking for. "Pack your things, Williams," he had said, not even looking up from his phone as I slipped into the conference room. "Security will escort you out in 10 minutes. The humiliation burned in my chest as I walked through the lobby, past the marble columns and crystal chandeliers that had once impressed me. Now they seemed like monuments to a world I would never truly belong to. The security guard, a kind older man named Frank, had whispered an apology as he walked me to the exit. "That man's got it coming to him," Frank had muttered under his breath. Mark my words. I didn't understand what he meant then. I wouldn't understand for another 3 hours, when everything I thought I knew about my life would shatter like glass. My apartment was a studio in Queens, the kind of place where the radiator clanged all night and the neighbors upstairs seemed to be training for the Olympics in competitive furniture moving. I dropped the cardboard box on my kitchen table and stared at it like it might contain answers. A coffee mug with the company logo. A small potted plant that was already dying. A few pens and a notebook filled with financial projections that no longer mattered. This was what 2 years of my life amounted to. I pulled out my phone to start the dreaded job search when it rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Is this Michael Williams?" The voice was professional, crisp. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Janet Rodriguez from Hartwell, Pierce and Associates. I'm calling regarding your father's estate." The world tilted sideways. "I'm sorry, what?" "Your father, Jonathan Williams." "I'm afraid there's been an accident." The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the linoleum floor. My father. The man who had walked out when I was 12, leaving behind nothing but a forwarding address that led to a dead end and a lifetime of unanswered questions. The man I had spent years trying to forget, and then years trying to find. I retrieved the phone with shaking hands. "What kind of accident? Perhaps we should discuss this in person. Can you come to our offices this afternoon? There are some matters regarding his estate that require your immediate attention." Estate. The word felt foreign on my tongue. My father had been a ghost for 15 years. What kind of estate could a ghost leave behind? 2 hours later, I sat in a conference room that made Morrison Financial's offices look like a food court. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park, and the mahogany table could have doubled as a runway. Janet Rodriguez was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Your father was a remarkable man," she began, sliding a thick folder across the table. "I assume you weren't aware of the extent of his business interests." I opened the folder and felt the air leave my lungs. Financial statements. Property deeds. Stock certificates. The numbers swam before my eyes, commas and zeros that didn't make sense. "This can't be right," I whispered. "I assure you, everything has been thoroughly verified. Your father owned a controlling interest in 17 companies, including a significant stake in Morrison Financial Group." The room spun. Morrison Financial Group. The company that had just fired me. The company where Richard Morrison strutted around like he owned the world. How significant? I managed to ask. Janet's smile was sharp as a blade. 62%. Your father was the majority shareholder. Which means, as of this morning, you are now the majority owner of Morrison Financial Group. The irony was so thick I could taste it. The man who had fired me for being 7 minutes late had unknowingly fired his own boss. "There's more," Janet continued, seemingly oblivious to my existential crisis. "Your father left specific instructions regarding the management of his assets. He was quite particular about maintaining anonymity in his business dealings. Most of the companies he owned have no idea who their real owner is." "Why?" The question came out as a croak. "Your father was a very private man. He believed that wealth made people targets. He preferred to operate from the shadows, so to speak." She pulled out another document, this one sealed with red wax. "He left this for you personally. Instructions on how to handle the revelation of your inheritance." He seemed to anticipate that it might come as quite a shock. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my father's familiar handwriting, the same script I remembered from birthday cards that stopped coming when I turned 13. "Michael. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've learned the truth about what I've been doing all these years. I know you must hate me for leaving. I know you must think I abandoned you and your mother because I didn't care. That's not true, asterisk. Asterisk, I left because I loved you too much to put you in danger. When you were 12, I discovered something that changed everything. I can't put the details in writing, but know that staying would have meant risking your life and your mother's life, asterisk. Asterisk, I've spent every day since then building something for you. Every company I bought, every investment I made, it was all for you. I hired investigators to watch over you from a distance. I know about your grades, your jobs, your struggles. I wanted to help, but I couldn't risk making contact, asterisk. Asterisk, now that I'm gone, it's safe for you to claim what's yours. But be careful, son. With great power comes great danger. Trust no one completely. Question everything. And remember that sometimes the people who seem weakest are actually the strongest, asterisk. Asterisk, there's one more thing. The reason I died wasn't an accident. Someone discovered who I really was, and they killed me for it. I don't know who, but I know they'll come for you too once they realize you exist, asterisk. Asterisk, be smart. Be careful. And remember that I never stopped loving you, asterisk. Your father. The letter fell from my hands as if it were on fire. Murder. My father had been murdered. And whoever killed him would eventually come for me. "Ms. Rodriguez," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded. "Do you believe my father's death was really an accident?" Her pause told me everything I needed to know. The police ruled it a single-car accident. He apparently fell asleep at the wheel and drove into a tree. But you don't believe that. Your father was the most careful driver I knew. He hadn't had so much as a speeding ticket in 20 years. And there were some irregularities with the scene that bothered me. What kind of irregularities? The car was completely destroyed, but the skid marks suggested he never hit the brakes. Like he was unconscious before the crash. And there were traces of a sedative in his system that weren't prescribed by any of his doctors. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had drugged my father and sent him to his death. Someone who knew who he was and what he was worth. "Ms. Rodriguez, I need you to help me with something. And I need your absolute discretion." "Of course. I want to know everything about Morrison Financial Group. Who works there, who has access to financial records, who might have discovered my father's identity. And I want it done without anyone knowing I'm asking." She made a note on her legal pad. "May I ask why you're starting there?" I thought about Richard Morrison's smug face as he fired me. About the way he had treated me like garbage for 2 years, never knowing that I could destroy his entire world with a single phone call. "Because," I said, "I think my father's killer might be someone I know." The next few days passed in a blur of secret meetings and clandestine investigations. Janet worked her connections while I played the part of the recently unemployed analyst, making sure to maintain my normal routine. I couldn't afford to let anyone know that my circumstances had dramatically changed. Janet's preliminary report was disturbing. Morrison Financial Group was in serious financial trouble, far worse than anyone realized. Someone had been siphoning money from client accounts for months, using sophisticated techniques to hide the theft. The company was on the verge of collapse, and only a massive injection of capital could save it. Capital that would have to come from the majority shareholder. Me. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. The embezzlement had started exactly 3 months ago. 3 months ago, someone at Morrison Financial had gained access to information they shouldn't have had. Information about the company's true ownership structure. Someone had figured out who my father was. I was studying the financial reports in my apartment when my phone rang. Unknown number again. Hello? Michael Williams? The voice was different this time. Rougher. Threatening. Who is this? Someone who knows what you inherited. Someone who knows what happened to your father. My heart hammered against my ribs. What do you want? A meeting. Tonight. Pier 47. Come alone, or you'll end up like Daddy. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. This was obviously a trap. The smart thing would be to call the police, to tell Janet, to get protection. But the smart thing wouldn't get me answers. And answers were what I needed most. I arrived at Pier 47 an hour early, scouting the area and looking for escape routes. The waterfront was deserted except for a few joggers and an old man feeding pigeons. I found a position behind a shipping container where I could watch the meeting spot without being seen. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. Even in the dim light, I recognized him immediately. Frank. The security guard from Morrison Financial. He stood alone on the pier, checking his watch every few seconds. After 10 minutes, he pulled out his phone and made a call. He's not coming, I heard him say. Yeah, I think he figured it out. We need to move to Plan B. Plan B. That sounded ominous. Frank ended the call and started walking back toward the street. I followed at a distance, staying in the shadows and trying to piece together what I had just witnessed. Frank, the kind old security guard who had apologized for escorting me out of the building, was involved in my father's murder. But why? And who was he working with? I tailed him for 6 blocks until he disappeared into a dingy bar called Murphy's. Through the window, I could see him talking animatedly to someone in a corner booth, but the angle was wrong to identify his companion. This was getting too dangerous to handle alone. I needed help, and I needed it from someone I could trust completely. The problem was, my father's letter had warned me to trust no one. I pulled out my phone and called Janet. Michael? It's very late. I need to see you. Now. It's urgent. What's happened? I can't talk about it over the phone. Can you meet me at your office? There was a pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Janet's office building was empty except for the night security guard, who waved us through without question. We rode the elevator to the 43rd floor in silence, but I could feel her watching me with concern. Someone called me tonight, I said once we were safely behind her closed door. Someone who knows about my father's death. They wanted to meet. Her face went pale. Please tell me you didn't go. I went, but I didn't make contact. I watched from a distance. I told her about Frank, about the phone call, about the mysterious person in the bar. Janet was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. Michael, I think it's time to involve the authorities. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Not yet. I need more information first. This is dangerous. Your father is dead, and now someone is threatening you. We need professional help. I have an idea, but I need your help to pull it off. She sighed. What kind of idea? I want to go back to Morrison Financial. Not as Michael Williams, the fired analyst. As the new majority owner. Janet's eyes widened. That's incredibly risky. If the person who killed your father works there, you'd be walking directly into their hands. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be forcing them to make a mistake. Think about it. Right now, they probably think they're safe. My father is dead, I don't know about my inheritance, and they can continue their embezzlement scheme until the company collapses. But if you show up as the owner, they'll panic. Panicked people make mistakes. And mistakes leave evidence. Janet was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, she nodded. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. I'll have a security team watching the building. You'll wear a wire. And at the first sign of trouble, we extract you immediately. Agreed. There's one more thing. If we're going to sell this, you need to look the part. No offense, but you dress like a junior analyst, not like someone who owns a $40 million company. She was right. My wardrobe consisted mostly of discount suits and shirts with frayed collars. If I was going to convince people that I was the new owner of Morrison Financial, I needed to look like I belonged in that world. The next morning, Janet took me to a tailor on Madison Avenue who specialized in dressing billionaires. 3 hours and several $1,000s later, I looked like a completely different person. The suit was Italian, the shoes were handmade, and the watch was worth more than my rent for 6 months. Remember, Janet said as we rode the elevator up to Morrison Financial, you're not Michael Williams the analyst anymore. You're Michael Williams, majority owner and new CEO. Act like you own the place. I do own the place. Exactly. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into my old workplace with new eyes. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile that faltered when she didn't immediately recognize me. Good morning, I said, my voice carrying an authority I had never possessed before. I'm Michael Williams. I believe Mr. Morrison is expecting me. The receptionist's confusion deepened. I'm sorry, but I don't have any appointments scheduled for Mr. Morrison this morning. That's because this isn't a scheduled appointment. Please inform Mr. Morrison that the new majority owner is here to see him. Her face went white. Within seconds, she was on the phone, speaking in urgent whispers. I could hear Richard Morrison's voice through the receiver, loud and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. He'll see you now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I walked through the familiar hallways, past cubicles where my former colleagues worked, their heads turning to stare as I passed. I could see the questions in their eyes, the confusion and recognition struggling against each other. Richard Morrison's office was a monument to ego, filled with awards and photographs of him shaking hands with various politicians and celebrities. He stood behind his desk as I entered, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. What the hell is this supposed to be, Williams? Some kind of joke? No joke, Richard. May I call you Richard? I think our new working relationship calls for a more informal approach. New working relationship? I fired you yesterday. Yes, you did. For being 7 minutes late to a meeting. Quite the management style. I walked over to his window and looked out at the city. I have to say, the view from up here is spectacular. I can see why you'd want to protect it. Get out of my office before I call security. Security? I turned to face him, and for the first time since entering the room, I smiled. You mean Frank? The security guard who's been embezzling money from client accounts for the past 3 months? Morrison's face went from red to ashen in an instant. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know that this company is on the verge of bankruptcy. Just like you don't know that someone has been stealing from your clients to cover massive trading losses. I walked over to his desk and sat down in the chair across from him, never breaking eye contact. But here's what I think you do know, Richard. I think you know exactly who's been stealing. I think you know because you've been helping them. This is insane. You're insane. I'm calling the police. By all means, call them. I'm sure they'd be very interested in the financial records I've already turned over to the SEC. It was a bluff, but it worked. Morrison sank into his chair, his bluster finally deflating. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want the truth. I want to know who killed my father, and I want to know why." For a moment, Morrison looked genuinely confused. "Your father? What does your father have to do with any of this? Don't play dumb, Richard. It doesn't suit you. I swear to you, I have no idea what you're talking about. Who is your father?" I studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception. But all I saw was confusion and fear. Either Morrison was a better actor than I gave him credit for, or he genuinely didn't know about my connection to Jonathan Williams. "My father," I said slowly, "was Jonathan Williams, the majority owner of this company. The man who died in a car accident 3 weeks ago." Morrison's mouth fell open. For several seconds, he just stared at me, his brain clearly struggling to process this information. "That's impossible," he finally whispered. "Why is it impossible?" "Because Jonathan Williams doesn't exist. I mean, he exists on paper, but no one's ever met him. He's like a ghost. All communication goes through lawyers and intermediaries. That's because he valued his privacy. But someone figured out who he was. Someone at this company gained access to information they shouldn't have had." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his face cycling through various emotions. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Michael, I need to tell you something. Something that's going to be very hard to hear." "I'm listening." "The embezzlement you mentioned? It's real. Someone has been stealing from client accounts. But it's not Frank." "Then who?" Morrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "3 months ago, I hired a private investigator to figure out who was behind the thefts. What he found." He shook his head. I didn't want to believe it. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports. As I read through them, my blood turned to ice. The embezzler wasn't Frank. It wasn't Morrison. It was Janet Rodriguez. My trusted lawyer, the woman who had helped me discover my inheritance, the woman who was supposedly helping me investigate my father's murder, had been stealing from the company for months. And according to the investigator's report, she had been the one to discover my father's true identity. "This can't be right," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true. Janet had access to all of my father's financial records. She would have known about his stake in Morrison Financial. She would have known about the money. "I'm sorry, Michael. I truly am." When I found out about the thefts, I confronted her. She claimed it was just a temporary loan, that she was going to pay it back. But the amounts kept getting larger. "How much?" $12 million so far. The number hit me like a physical blow. $12 million. More money than I had ever imagined, stolen by the woman I had trusted to help me find my father's killer. Because she was my father's killer. "Richard, I need to use your phone. And I need you to call security. The real security, not Frank." As Morrison reached for his phone, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Janet had discovered my father's identity while managing his estate. She had realized that he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and she had started skimming money from Morrison Financial to fund her own lifestyle. But my father had been careful. He had investigators watching his companies, making sure nothing went wrong. Eventually, those investigators would have discovered the embezzlement, and they would have traced it back to Janet. So she had killed him. Made it look like an accident. And then she had contacted me, playing the role of the grieving lawyer helping the son discover his inheritance. But why involve me at all? Why not just disappear with the money she had already stolen? The answer came to me with sickening clarity. Janet needed me to legitimize her access to my father's accounts. As the heir, I was the only person who could authorize large transfers without raising suspicions. She had been planning to convince me to make her my financial advisor, giving her complete access to the fortune. And I had almost fallen for it. My phone buzzed with a text message. Janet. Asterisk, where are you? We need to talk immediately. It's about your father's killer, asterisk. I showed the message to Morrison. She knows something's wrong. What do you want to do? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Janet again. Michael, thank God. Where are you? At Morrison Financial. Why? You need to get out of there immediately. I've discovered something terrible about Richard Morrison. He's the one who killed your father. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, with her scheme falling apart, she was trying to manipulate me. Really? What did you discover? I found evidence that he's been embezzling money from the company. Millions of dollars. When your father started asking questions, Morrison had him killed. That's interesting, Janet. Because I'm looking at evidence that suggests someone else has been stealing from Morrison Financial. Someone with access to my father's financial records. There was a long pause. When Janet spoke again, her voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. How much do you know? Everything. I doubt that. But it doesn't matter now. You killed him. You killed my father for money. Your father was a selfish man who hoarded wealth while people like me struggled to make ends meet. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch clients get richer while you're barely able to pay your bills? So you decided to steal from them. I decided to take what I deserved. And your father got in the way. The confession sent a chill down my spine. She was admitting to murder as casually as discussing the weather. Janet, it's over. The police are already involved. Turn yourself in, and maybe we can work something out. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. The police? Michael, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I didn't do this alone. What do you mean? Your father's death required resources I don't have. Contacts in certain circles. People who specialize in making problems disappear. Who are you working with? People who don't like loose ends. People who are already on their way to tie up the biggest loose end of all. The line went dead. Morrison was staring at me in horror. Michael, what did she mean about people coming to tie up loose ends? She means they're coming to kill me. As if summoned by my words, the lights in the office suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. That's not normal, Morrison whispered. Through the office windows, I could see that the power was out for the entire building. Someone had cut the electricity, probably to disable the security systems. My phone buzzed with another text message. Unknown number. Asterisk top floor. Come alone. You have 5 minutes, asterisk. Richard, is there another way out of this building? Something besides the elevators? There's a fire stairwell, but it'll take forever to get down 40 floors. What about up? Is there roof access? Yes, but why would you want to go up? Because they're expecting me to try to escape. They won't expect me to go toward them. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one I had. Morrison gave me directions to the roof access, and I started making my way through the darkened hallways. The emergency lighting cast weird shadows on the walls, making every corner look like it might hide an assassin. I could hear voices echoing through the building, searchers calling out to each other as they methodically checked each floor. They were working their way up from the bottom, which meant I had maybe 10 minutes before they reached Morrison's office. The stairwell to the roof was cramped and poorly lit, but I climbed as quickly and quietly as I could. My expensive new shoes weren't designed for this kind of activity, and I could feel blisters forming on my feet. The roof access door was locked, but years of living in a sketchy neighborhood had taught me a few useful skills. The lock was old and simple, and it took me less than 2 minutes to pick it. The roof of Morrison Financial was a maze of air conditioning units and satellite dishes. The wind was stronger up here, and I had to squint against the dust and debris it kicked up. Manhattan stretched out below me, a galaxy of lights that made my current situation seem surreal. I found a position behind a large air conditioning unit where I could see the roof access door without being seen myself. Then I waited. It didn't take long. The door opened after about 5 minutes, and 3 figures emerged onto the roof. Even in the dim light, I could make out their shapes. 2 men in dark clothing, moving with the fluid precision of professionals. And between them, Janet Rodriguez. "I know you're up here, Michael," she called out. "There's nowhere left to run." I stayed hidden, watching as the 3 of them spread out across the roof. The 2 men were armed, their weapons gleaming in the moonlight. "This doesn't have to end badly," Janet continued. "We can make a deal. You sign over power of attorney to me, and you get to walk away from all of this. You go back to your little apartment in Queens and pretend none of this ever happened." It was tempting, I had to admit. A few hours ago, I had been an unemployed analyst with no prospects and no future. Now I was being hunted by killers who wanted to steal a fortune I had never asked for. But then I thought about my father. About the letter he had left me, explaining how every choice he had made was to protect me and provide for me. About the 15 years he had spent building something for a son he couldn't contact. I couldn't let his sacrifice be for nothing. "Janet," I called out, not revealing my position. "I have a counteroffer." "I'm listening." "You and your friends leave now, and I don't have you prosecuted for embezzlement and murder." She laughed. "You're not in a position to make threats, Michael." "Actually, I am." I pulled out my phone and held it up so they could see the screen. On it was a live video feed showing the 3 of them on the roof. "Say hello to the FBI," I said. "They've been watching this building for the past hour." It was another bluff, but it was a good one. Janet's face went white, and the 2 armed men looked around nervously. "You're lying," Janet said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then why don't you check the street below?" All 3 of them rushed to the edge of the roof and looked down. What they saw made them step back in shock. The street around Morrison Financial was filled with police cars and federal agents. Red and blue lights painted the surrounding buildings in alternating colors. "How?" Janet whispered. "My father was a careful man," I said, finally stepping out from behind the air conditioning unit. "He had contingency plans for everything, including his own death." The moment his heart stopped beating, a dead man's switch was activated. Every piece of evidence he had collected about his business dealings, including evidence of the embezzlement at Morrison Financial, was automatically sent to law enforcement. It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. Janet's face cycled through a range of emotions before settling on rage. "If I'm going down," she said, "I'm taking you with me." She nodded to the 2 armed men, who raised their weapons. But before they could fire, the roof access door burst open and a dozen FBI agents swarmed onto the roof. Federal agents. "Drop your weapons." The next few minutes were chaos. Shouting, confusion, the sharp crack of gunfire. When it was over, one of Janet's accomplices was dead, the other was wounded and in custody, and Janet herself was lying face down on the roof with her hands zip-tied behind her back. I sat on a ventilation unit, trying to process everything that had happened. An FBI agent named Sarah Chen was asking me questions, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. "Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams, are you all right?" I looked up at her, this professional woman in a windbreaker with FBI written across the chest, and suddenly started laughing. It was the kind of laughter that borders on hysteria, the kind that comes when your entire world changes in the span of 24 hours. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to get control of myself. "It's just, yesterday I was fired for being 7 minutes late to work. Today I own the company." Agent Chen smiled. "From what I understand, you own a lot more than just the company." She was right. Over the following weeks, as lawyers and accountants sorted through my father's estate, the true scope of his wealth became clear. Morrison Financial Group was just the tip of the iceberg. He had investments in technology companies, real estate holdings across 3 continents, and enough liquid assets to fund a small country. But more importantly, I learned who my father really was. The investigators he had hired weren't just watching his companies. They were also watching me, making sure I was safe, documenting my life so he could feel connected to the son he couldn't contact. I found boxes of photographs in his safe. Pictures of me graduating high school, starting college, getting my first job. He had been there for all of it, invisible but present, a guardian angel I never knew existed. The trial of Janet Rodriguez made national headlines. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she eventually pleaded guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and murder in the first degree. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard Morrison, meanwhile, was cleared of all charges. The investigation revealed that he had been trying to stop the embezzlement when Janet decided to have my father killed. I offered him his job back, with a significant raise and a promise that no one would ever be fired for being 7 minutes late to a meeting. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where Janet had first told me about my inheritance. But this time, I wasn't there as a confused heir trying to understand his new circumstances. I was there as the CEO of Williams Financial Group, the new name for the company that had grown from my father's estate. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the assembled board of directors, "I want to talk to you about the future." I had learned a lot in those 6 months. About business, about wealth, about the responsibility that comes with both. But most importantly, I had learned about my father, and about the choices he had made to protect the people he loved. The company would be different under my leadership. More transparent, more ethical, more focused on actually helping people rather than just making money. It was what my father would have wanted, and it was what the world needed. As I looked out at the faces around the conference table, I thought about Frank, the security guard who had tried to warn me that Richard Morrison had it coming to him. Frank had known something was wrong at the company, even if he hadn't known exactly what. He was still working security, but now he also served as my personal advisor on employee relations. Sometimes the people who seem to know the least actually know the most. My father had been right about that, and about many other things. With great power does come great danger, but it also comes with great opportunity. The opportunity to make a difference, to build something lasting, to leave the world a little better than you found it. I never did find out exactly why my father left when I was 12, beyond his vague references to danger. But I understood his choice better now. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making sacrifices they'll never understand. Sometimes being a good father means being absent, as long as you're still fighting for your child's future. The morning I had been fired from Morrison Financial, I thought my life was over. I thought I was a failure, destined to struggle in obscurity while more successful people looked down on me from their glass towers. I couldn't have been more wrong. Sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of your real life. Sometimes getting fired is the best thing that could happen to you. And sometimes the parent you thought abandoned you was actually working harder than you ever imagined to give you everything you deserved. My father had spent 15 years building an empire for a son he couldn't contact. The least I could do was spend the rest of my life making sure his sacrifice meant something. The meeting ended, and I walked back to my office, the same office where Richard Morrison had once fired me for being late. The view was still spectacular, but now I saw it differently. It wasn't a monument to ego or a symbol of power over others. It was a reminder of responsibility. A reminder that every decision I made would affect thousands of people, and that my father's legacy was now in my hands. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. There was work to do, companies to run, and a legacy to honor. But first, I had one more task to complete. I pulled out a sheet of letterhead and began to write. Dear Dad. I know you can't read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand why you left, why you stayed away, and why you spent 15 years building something for a son you couldn't see, I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Grateful for the sacrifice you made, grateful for the empire you built, and grateful for the lessons you taught me without ever saying a word, I promise you this, I will use what you've given me wisely. I will protect the people who work for these companies. I will make ethical choices even when they're difficult. And I will never forget that with great power comes great responsibility, asterisk. Asterisk most importantly, I will make sure that your story doesn't end with your death. Your story continues through me, through the lives we touch, and through the good we can do with the resources you provided, asterisk. Asterisk thank you for being the father I needed, even when I didn't realize it. Thank you for loving me enough to sacrifice everything. And thank you for trusting me with your life's work, asterisk. I won't let you down. Your son, Michael. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the original letter my father had left for me. Then I turned back to my computer and got to work. Outside my window, the city hummed with life and possibility. Somewhere out there were other young people struggling to make ends meet, working for bosses who didn't appreciate them, wondering if they would ever get their chance to make something of themselves. I couldn't help them all, but I could help some. And maybe, if I was very lucky and very careful, I could build something that would last long enough for my own children to inherit. Something that would give them choices, opportunities, and the security that comes with knowing their father would never abandon them. The phone on my desk rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my assistant, letting me know that there was a young woman in the lobby asking for a job. She had just been fired from her previous position for being 10 minutes late to a meeting. I smiled. Send her up, I said. I think we might have an opening. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with justice. But the best stories, the ones that really matter, end with hope. Hope for the future, hope for redemption, and hope that the next generation will learn from the mistakes of the one that came before. My father had given me more than money or power. He had given me a second chance to get life right. And as I prepared to meet with another young person who needed a second chance of their own, I realized that this was how legacies really worked. Not through the accumulation of wealth, but through the multiplication of opportunities. Not through the hoarding of power, but through the sharing of hope. My name is Michael Williams, and I used to be nobody special. Just another face in the crowd, another worker bee in the corporate hive, another casualty of an indifferent system. But now I know the truth. There's no such thing as nobody special. There are only people who haven't been given their chance yet. And if you're very fortunate, if you're very grateful, and if you're very careful with the gifts you've been given, you might just be in a position to give someone else theirs. The elevator dinged, and I straightened my tie. It was time to get back to work. After all, I had a company to run, a legacy to honor, and a future to build. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be,